My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic, very glad to be here. I don't speak for AA. If anything I say bothers you, I wouldn't worry about it. I'm going to go straight in with this. The starting point is step 9. Well, you've got to have done step 8. So what have you got? You've got a list of the people you've harmed. The way I do that list, to get clear, I've got to have a picture of exactly what I did. No flim flam, no backstory, no, but I felt, but I didn't intend, just the thing itself. What did I do? Plus an understanding of who suffered and how. So that's another topic, how to do step 8. The starting point in step 9 is having that list. And then what step 9 is, as with all the other steps, we're used to seeing the steps on the wall scrolls in meetings, and we're used to seeing them on page 59 of the big book. They're not the steps. They're the titles of the steps. The full form of the step is the contents of the big book on that step. One of the prefaces, I think the third preface says as much, the steps which summarize our program. So you've got a title of the step, and then you've got the actual step. And the title on page 59 is "Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others." So I'm just going to look at the wording to start off with. Made direct amends to such people. Who are such people? Well, you're going to look back at step 8 for that. Made list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And it's always amazed me when I've done step 8 lists, I've got loads of people on there, loads of them. And I'm not even particularly unpleasant. I mean, I can be unpleasant, but I'm not out there in terms of huge amounts of criminal action. And I got loads of people. When I've talked to people who've been in recovery for a long time, who are fudged, well, one of the questions I always ask is, did you complete your amends? And they say, oh, yes, both of them. I'm like, oh, Jesus, you mean you've only negatively affected 2 people in your whole life? No. 2, 10, 20 is a bit slim. All persons we had harmed. Anyone I've affected negatively, which has left a residue behind it, needs to be dealt with, and that's a lot of people. And we're already willing by step 9. Step 8 became willing to make amends to them all. What are amends? Well, I'll go into lots of detail with quotations from the big book, but basically, you grab the person, you explain what you're doing. What are you doing? You're making amends. What do you then do? What I do is I admit what I did wrong. I did this. I did that. I shouldn't have done it. I regret doing it. If applicable, I'll ask for forgiveness. That's not one of my usual cards I play. Some people play that card. I don't. I don't want to ask anything back, but you can request forgiveness. That's kosher. What can I do to set this straight is a good question. Well, I might as well say it now because I'll forget. If they're crazy, don't ask them. Because otherwise they'll ask you to do some crazy whack job stuff, and you're going to have to say, I'm going to speak to my sponsor about that and get back to you. Just if you don't give them the chance to ask you to do something wacko, then you're not in a position of having to say no to them. So you say, what can I do to set this straight when you're making amends to a grown-up who is of sound mind and non-hysterical? So that kind of narrows it down. And then there's some follow-through action. So that's what the amends are. There'll be more detail on that later on. So made direct amends, Now, this is very widely misunderstood. I mean, I don't think I make any friends really by doing these talks, because half of what I say contradicts the bulk of what you get on a lot of speaker tapes. But there is a cultural tradition in certain parts of the world to say if the amend is not in person, it doesn't count. And they say, did you harm them in a letter? Well, if you didn't harm them in a letter, you can't make amends in a letter. And that's an approach, and that's a view. But what does the step actually say? It says direct. It doesn't say in person. The phrase in person was available in 1939. It was not chosen. They chose direct. Direct means to them, not by generally being nice, but directly to them. Now, how you make it directly to them, when you look at the actual text, it gives examples of face-to-face amends. It gives examples of standing up in church. It gives examples of conversations. It also gives examples of letters. That the book's doing that. That's not me saying that. The book says there are situations where an amend is better in writing. We'll come to where those. Actually, I might as well just say now. There are certain situations, if I've been out of touch with someone, then I'm going to want to do it in writing. I'll come to the approach in a minute. But I don't know about you. I knew some real crazy fudgers over the years. If you tried to make amends by having a conversation with them, they would steamroll, bulldoze, divert onto another topic and start attacking you back. And you have no chance to even get the amend out, because it's now turned into some Barnum and Bailey production number about some old grievance. You can't have the conversation with some people. A lot of people you just can't have a rational conversation with. The only way to get the message across clearly, without interruption, deviation, or hesitation, is to do it in writing. There are situations with exes where they're now married, where you do not want to be knocking on their door and have the husband answer, but you can write a respectful letter. So there are lots and lots of situations where letters are suitable. The step is made direct amends, and in person is very good, but it's not the only way of doing it. It depends on the circumstances. The book is also very clear. So there's this rule that it has to be in person. The book says there are no rules. That's the book, again, that's the book saying that. It says there are innumerable situations. It's very wise. It is non-prescriptive about step 9. It says you have to do it, but you have to judge each situation differently. We've also got the question, I can see just on the screen in front of me, there are people from different cultures. Amends conversations go down very differently in the UK than they do in America. The levels of cynicism about spiritual stuff, there have been very, very bad reactions to amend types that go down very well in the States. So there are cultural things to take into account there. If you're in France or the Netherlands, you don't want to be mentioning the fact you're on a mission from God. They'll call the police at that point in Amsterdam or Paris. In Paris, you'll get some extra eye rolling. In Holland, they'll just blank you. But you'll get the shrugs, the everything, the sighing, all of that, the puffs, the Parisian puff. You've got to take into account the culture of the people that you're making amends to. So it's got to be it's about them. It's not about you. It's about restoring the relationships with them. So you don't want to go in like a crazy coot with this stuff. Where am I? So this notion of direct amends. A lot of people, if they're in my life, you can hijack them. You grab them at the meeting as they're wolfing a custard cream, say, can I have a couple of minutes? I owe you an apology. You take them aside, you set it straight, and you're done. In domestic situations, you can do that. I've had friends, I just called them up. There are people you can do that. When the relationship is so ruptured that, and especially if the harms are of a certain type, you don't want to be just hijacking them, putting them on the spot, interrupting them. I approach people in writing saying, I would like to make amends for, sometimes I'll say I'd like to make amends and then leave it to the amend situation to go into detail. Sometimes I'll do the whole amend in the approach, in the written approach, say, I would love to talk to you about this face to face, on the phone, video call, whatever, but I'll leave it up to you. The book talks about tact and consideration. Some people who've wanted to make amends to me over the years, I'm very pleased. It's not many, but I'm pleased. I'm pleased they're going to do it. It doesn't mean I want, sometimes what people do is say, you get this message from someone you haven't spoken to in 5 years, and they say, hey, would you like to meet for a coffee? I mean, it's in a WhatsApp, so that's not the tone, but you're like, I last saw you in 2012. Why do you want to, you want to meet me for a coffee? What's your game, Buster? So I don't like surprises. A lot of people don't like, if you're not in contact with them, if they're not calling you, they don't want to talk to you. That's why they don't call you. So don't presume that they're going to want the conversation. You offer them the amend. Very often the reason they don't want to talk to you is because you owe them amends. You're on their list of people not to talk to. So you've got to go in tactfully. You say, I want to make amends. In the approach, you say exactly what you're doing. I want to make amends. I have no ulterior motive. And one thing you can do, if you don't know you're going to hear back, you can say, you may not want to hear from me. This may be a very unwelcome missive coming through to you, but I want to make amends. I'm very glad to. If I don't hear from you, I'm just going to send it through in writing, and then you can read it or delete it or do whatever you want, because that saves you having to pester them for a response. You just warn them you're going to be sending something. That is administratively simpler as well. So either I grab the person, I call them, or I make this approach and then follow through with the approach. When they come back, they say, yes, call me at this time, or I'll see you at this meeting, or send me a letter, or whatever. I follow through. Now, the thorny topic is the except when to do so would injure them or others. And in a fellowship where the levels of arrant nonsense can sometimes be eye-watering, the interpretations of this phrase take the biscuit, and we're going to come some examples of that in a way which does no one any favors. As I said, my question to people who are 20 years sober and spending a little bit too much time in the less salubrious dens of London. The question is, how, did you complete your amends? And then it's half a dozen. The fact is, what they did, they'll have had a whacking step 8 list, but their sponsor will have carved off whole areas of things not to make amends for. And you're left with kind of 4 polite amends letters to distant cousins. And that's kind of it. So there's a huge amount of co-signing of not making amends in AA under this caption, except when to do so would injure them or others. So we've got to understand what this even means, and then set the criteria for what it means based on what is in the book, and then test our step 8s against it. And I can tell you, in my experience, I made several dozen formal amends I got sober in 93, several dozen formal amends in 93, 94, several dozen formal amends about 14 years later, 13, 14 years later. And there have been dribs and drabs in between as well. And there have been lots of situations where I've had to make amends. And I'm kind of run of the mill. I'm not particularly wicked. There are people with 700, 800. And I found it in my lists vanishingly rare for that clause, except when to do so would injure them or others, vanishingly rare that that clause can get invoked. And I'll explain why. First of all, it says injure. We have to know a little bit about Bill. Bill was taught by some grade school teacher, don't use the same word twice. So we've got, in step 5, we've got the exact nature of our wrongs. In step 6, we've got defects, we've got shortcomings. Here we've got harm, suddenly we've got injure. It's the same thing. So you can read step 9 to say, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. Basically, you've got to look on balance. Is this endeavor, the step 9 endeavor, going to improve the net situation? Or so is the net situation going to improve, or is it going to deteriorate? You're looking at the whole situation in the round. Is it going to be better? Is it going to be worse? If it's going to be better, you do it. If it's not going to be better, you don't. There are 3 situations I've identified from the book, and it's all, we'll come to those when I read out the quotations, where the amend, as described above, could cause harm. And it's really the first one covers the other 2. Basically, it's revealing new information. If they know you did it, if they know what you did and they know what did it, an apology can cause no harm to anyone. It's impossible for someone's life to be made materially worse by receiving a heartfelt, sincere, well-worded, formal, respectful apology. This can damage no one unless there is new information. The new information could be about the content, it could be about the identity. Specifically, the 2 ways in which that could happen. You can, in revealing new information, you can set in motion trains of circumstances. For instance, in a corporate environment, you could be sacked for something. In the area of criminal law, you could be prosecuted because new information has been revealed. If the information is known and nothing has been done about it, apologizing is not going to cause a problem. My life has never been made worse by someone apologizing to me. I've been annoyed by it, but that's different. Sometimes it's annoying because of the way it's done or the timing, but I can't be harmed. I'll tell you, however, some people, I remember someone tried to make amends to me a few years ago. I don't wonder if they'll ever hear this tape. They said, I didn't know them, never, that they were the girlfriend of a sponsee, a former sponsee. She said, I want to make amends to you. You used to sponsor my ex-boyfriend. And she said, and I said, I don't know who you are. I don't even recognize the name. And she said, well, I need to make amends to you because I've been bad-mouthing you to the whole of East London AA. And I was like, I did not know that. This is new information. I now have a different perception of what has been going on in East London AA. Now, I don't particularly care. But there are people who really would. You want to be careful saying something like that. What's the problem? New information. Plenty of people have bad-mouthed me. I've got a big mouth. So if you've got a big mouth, you're going to get bad-mouthed. It comes with the territory. The destination is printed clearly on that ticket. And so I know some people who bad-mouthed me. If none of them have apologized, but if one of them did, I'd be great. No harm could be done by that because I know they did what they did. It's fine. I'm already over it. It's like, I don't care. I'm fine. The third thing, I don't want to involve third parties. Don't drag anyone else into this. The typical example is crime involving several people. Particularly crime involving complicity. So depending on your step 8, there could be loads of those or there could be none of those. Just looking at whether it would harm someone, one of the things that people sometimes say is you don't want to reopen old wounds. You don't want to now that sounds like a really bad thing to do. Like if you had a physical wound which was healed, you wouldn't get a knife and open it up again. That's really clear. But the problem here is that's a really bad image for what is going on here. First of all, if you said, well, that's our test, I shall make amends unless to do so would be to open an old wound. If I harmed them, there is a wound. If it's in the past, it's an old wound. In other words, every single situation requiring an amend contains an old wound. That's why I'm making amends. That argument is complete nonsense. Raking up the past, all of that sort of stuff. The fact is, if they're still pissed off, the missing piece, which might be necessary for them to not be pissed off, is your apology. A couple of images I've heard people use, this is not reopening old wounds. If you stick a knife in someone's back and they can't remove it because it's in their back, you're the one that has to remove it because you can reach for it. And the fact it's been in there festering for the last 30 years does not reduce the necessity of making it. It increases the necessity of making it. If you left your moldy trash on someone else's lawn last week, you need to clear it. If you left it on their lawn for 30 years and it's been festering and turning into this huge mound of trash, again, the fact that it's old means there is even more necessity to act. If they're still upset 30 years later, boy, do you need to make this amend. There are a couple of examples actually in the book that prove this point, that the other person's emotional reaction to the amend is not a factor in whether or not you do it. By necessity, amends are going to be, if they're worth making, the situation is touchy and difficult. And they are entitled to have emotions. They're entitled to be angry. They're entitled to be upset. You're not creating the upset. You're bringing out upset which is within them. If I'm over something and you bring it up, I'm not going to feel anything. If I feel something when you bring it up, it was inside the whole time. So the caveat in the second half of step 9, except when to do so would injure them or others, is about creating new harm by revealing new information which compromises my ability to be useful or affects other people in some way. And we might come to some specific examples of that. Couple of points as well, a little vignette from Dr. Bob. And this is from A Vision for You. Just as he thought he was getting control of his liquor situation, he went on a roaring bender. By the way, I always think that would be a wonderful name for I can say this because I'm gay, a gay and lesbian AA meeting, the Roaring Benders group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anyway, just as he thought he was getting control of his liquor situation, he went off on a roaring bender. For him, this was the spree that ended all sprees. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery. One morning, he took the bull by the horns and set out to tell those he feared what his trouble had been. He found himself surprisingly well received and learned that many knew of his drinking. Stepping into his car, he made the rounds of people he had hurt. He trembled as he went about, for this might mean ruin, particularly to a person in his line of business. At midnight, he came home exhausted but very happy. He has not had a drink since. So for Dr. Bob, there was none of, oh, I'm waiting for the right moment. I'm going to do this in God's time, which sounds so spiritual. That means not today. Have you noticed when they say in God's time, God doesn't seem to say anything to them between now and lunchtime. What they mean is, I'm not even going to look at this one in God's time, my foot. Willingness is action. Willingness without action is fantasy. Joe Hawke, God bless him, said, you know what willingness sounds like? And he made a knocking sound. It sounds like your knuckles knocking on someone's door. That's the sound of getting people's answer machines. The sound of the email whooshing out of your send box. That's what it sounds like. When I did a round of amends, I think I had 78 names, something like that on the list. I was about 15 years sober. I went at it hammer and tongs. Took me 9 days to get through the list of 78 names. I probably could have done that quicker, but 9 days is not bad. Not as good as Bob doing it in 1 day. But that's the kind of timescale we're looking at. What does the text say? So there are some wonderful quotations. I'm not going to read the whole of the big book on step 9, but I am going to read out some passages. First of all, it talks about mentioning AA and spirituality. And it talks about, I'm not going to quote this, but it talks about you don't want to prejudice them. But it says, we don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. One of the advantages in saying that I'm an alcoholic, I'm now sober, I'm in AA, we're on a spiritual path, we make amends. One of the advantages is it legitimizes why you're doing it. Because I don't know about you, but as an alcoholic, I would apologize, manipulate my way out of lots of situations. Sorry meant please like me again so I can continue acting as I've always acted. Please like me. Look how wounded I am. Look how pitiful I am in my remorse. So you've got to be careful making amends, that it's got to come across as credible. The quickest way of making it credible is do the whole AA shtick. If you harmed them whilst you were in AA, don't mention you're in AA because you just look like a jerk then. If it's to do with drinking and using and like when you are out there, then it's legitimate. The one problem is in work contexts, it just freaks people out. They think it's just weird, the fact you're mentioning this. It can be deeply inappropriate in work contexts. As I said earlier, British people can be very skeptical and cynical about mentioning spirituality. And so one might be careful there. What you can do, the alternative, and I've used this, I say to people, I'm going through a process of systematically reviewing where my behavior has negatively affected others, and I realize I've negatively affected you. This is also a good explanation for why you're apologizing 10 years later and not 10 minutes later. That's why. It explains why you're in touch after 10. It explains a lot of things. But if I'm not shy really about mentioning AA outside. A lot of people have been put in touch with AA. I've been the first port of call because of amends I made. Someone therefore knows I'm in AA and they send people my way. So it can be very useful. But in that passage, we're at the top of 77 if you're a page number junkie. It says, our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And this is the point. Step 9, it's not about me feeling better. It's about establishing a more credible basis for me to operate in the world. If I'm running around with lots of enemies, I'm not going to be trusted. There are psychological aspects to it. I remember I screwed over an employer. I might tell this story later on for this time. I screwed over an employer in the City of London, and I had this kind of psychological aversion to this whole part of London until I made the amend, and then the psychological aversion went. I hadn't realized this kind of cloud would descend on me whenever I approached that part of London. In case I saw some, maybe unconsciously, I thought maybe I'll see the person from the office, blah, blah, blah. I went to school in Germany for a while, and there are a bunch of amends I didn't make until my second round of amends when I was a number of years sober. And again, I had a troubled and disordered relationship with the country, Germany. And it turned out that it was these unmade amends. I made the amends, the relationship from my point of view normalized. You'll have to ask Germany what it thinks, but my side of that relationship was fine. There are so many weird things that I thought were wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with me except I had some amends to make. No psychologist ever suggested making amends, and I saw a number of professionals. But I can't tell you how many little weirdnesses and complexes just disappeared when I just made the effing amends. Nothing to see here. That's the great thing. You make the amends, there is now nothing to see. It's like those games where you got two cards and you have to match them in pairs. And when you match them in pairs, the two cards disappear. It's like that, the harm and the amend. You match the amend to the harm, they both disappear out of your consciousness. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want to make amends to this person because they harmed me more. I was when I was a minor, I was inveigled into a sexually inappropriate relationship with someone who's older. They were responsible in the situation. I had no idea what was going on. It was a horrible deal. It lasted 4 years, and it was very damaging. Did they harm me more? I think, how do you measure these things? I think so. But boy, in the last year of that, did I launch retaliatory measures, which were unkind and unnecessary. Was he a cad? Maybe, but also a human being. So I made amends for that, and my relationships with men cleared up significantly after I made that amend. Who knew that would be connected? But it was. In the book, what it says is, the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we have done him, and though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. But it says, it is harder to go to an enemy than to go to a friend. We take the bit in our teeth. In other words, I'm not interested in the balance, like who harmed who more. I deal with my side. With this situation with the firm in the city, long story short, they screwed me out of some money. And so I withheld my employment from them for 2 weeks. When I was at the end of the contract, I'd already resigned at this point, and they paid me in the middle of the month. And at the point that they paid me, I discovered that another amount they'd promised me was not going to be forthcoming. And so I tied up loose ends and just walked. They had paid me for the last 2 weeks of that month, but I was not there. They did not get any work for that. Now, the two questions of whether or not they screwed me over the other amount and my withholding my work for the pay they'd given me are unrelated questions. I made amends. I wrote to them. I said, this is really embarrassing, but this is what happened. This is the amount of my pay for those 2 weeks. I would like to give it back to you. They wrote a very gracious letter. They said, we don't want the money. We consider the matter closed. I had to write back and say, yeah, it isn't my money. Can you nominate a charity it can go to? And said, so even anyone who says, I don't want the money back, it's still not your money. It doesn't become your money because they say you don't have to pay it back. It has to go somewhere. So I found there was a charity that the firm supported, so the money went to the charity. I never got that bonus, but my conscience is clear because I cleared up my side of it. I don't get to stack up my harms against other people's. Very important in the amend. There are some very good guidelines. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling. You only do that bit if they know about it. You don't say, oh, by the way, I've hated you for the last 7 years. If there's been open warfare, you can confess it, but it's not really a confession. With relationships where that's under the surface, under no circumstances. Remember, the context of that paragraph is making amends to an enemy where there's open warfare. It says, expressing our regret, under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Now, there's an interesting line. It says, simply, we tell him we will never get over our drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. There are 7 points in the big book where it says, if you want to stay sober, you have to do this or you have to not do this. This is one of them. What does utmost mean? It means that the step 8 has to be complete. And during the process, and certainly at the end, I sit down, higher power, piece of paper, pen, and say, God, show me every single relationship where there is unfinished business going back to the start of my life, however trivial or minor it may seem to me. Anything. And those are the relationships I get to look at. Now, in each of those, I systematically look at what was my behavior. If it was wrong, I make amends. If there was nothing wrong in my behavior, but it's simply a resentment of some description, then I've got the forgiveness. Sandy Beach says your 2 problems are either unmade amends or unforgiven wrongs. The 2 solutions are to make amends and to forgive the wrongs. In the 12 and 12, it says that defective human relations are the root of all of our problems, including our alcoholism. Behind any relapsing or acting out there are always unfinished amends, unfulfilled obligations, ongoing harm. There is a problem with defective relations. Also, the amazing thing about this, FYI, and this is a thorny topic, but I've never had to address or solve or deal with a relationship problem in the last 29 years. There are no such things as relationship problems. I have behavior problems and attitude problems. My behavior, my attitude. When I fix my behavior and fix my attitude, poof, there goes the relationship problem. What I will do in my illness is project out all of my stuff onto this. There's me and there's you, and then I project all my stuff onto this thing called the relationship. And I have a problem with the relationship, and you have relationship counselors. And then eventually, if you can't solve the problem, what do? The relationships become like this goblin in the room. There's you that's fine, there's the other person who's fine, and then there's the relationship goblin. And of course, because it's all fictitious, if you can't solve it, what do? You shoot the goblin, you get rid of the relationship, you find a new one, and you recreate all of the same crap with someone else. What I've discovered is when I completely forgive and when I make amends and then follow through with the fulfillment of my proper obligations, suddenly I don't have a problem in my relationships anymore. So that saved me a lot of time. So that's why I heartily endorse the notions of forgiveness and making amends, because they've saved me going down all sorts of other rabbit holes. Most alcoholics. Oh, by the way, yeah. On this, bringing up the past and upsetting people because you're bringing up a painful thing. Now, it's very interesting. This is the book saying this. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. So this is a situation where you make amends to someone. They are so furious with you that they throw you out of their office. The book does not say, oh, you shouldn't have raked up the past there. No, it says, good boy, good lad, well done. You see, the thing is, as an alcoholic, I think there is a problem with human emotion. I conflate emotion with harm. Just because someone else is having feelings does not mean they've been harmed. Feelings are not problems to get rid of. Because someone feels something, it doesn't need to be fixed. Harm. Now, there is an overlap. There is the unnecessary causing of emotional suffering, when I make amends to someone, if they're still angry, some people have, boy, have they shouted at me. One bloke, 20 minutes, on and on and on, and you just let them speak until they're done. Shouted at me for 20 minutes. Saw him at a meeting a couple of weeks later, happy as Larry, never mentioned it again. And I've had that a lot. I mean, I've been such a jerk in AA. A lot of my amends are to people in AA. And their skin was crawling when I made the amend. There was one example, I won't not say the name. I finally pinned her down. I had to really sort of Sherlock Holmes to grab her. Pinned her down and made amends. And she wasn't happy. She didn't like it. But a funny thing happened. At a meeting, she was sitting next to a newcomer. The newcomer said, I was doing the chair at this meeting. I felt so sorry for the woman I just made amends to. She was so unhappy seeing me sitting there, arms crossed, scowling at me. But the newcomer nudged the woman in the what would that be, in the ribs, and said, I was going to ask him to be my sponsor. Is he okay? And she said, he's okay. So the fact that she hated me still was clearly irrelevant. I don't think she would have said that if I hadn't made amends, because there was unfinished business there. Criminal offences. It talks a lot about that. It's almost now. Lots of people have lots of criminal offences. I had a few. This is one where there is a really legitimate question about except when to do so would injure them or others. A lot of historical criminal offences from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, often the person knew the situation was all out in the open. If they were going to prosecute or call the police, they would have a long time ago. Sometimes the harm was known about, but the identity of the person was not known about. Another common one is defrauding the benefit system, shoplifting. I mean, there are endless examples. There's no time to list them all. Now, the question is here, you want to set this straight. You want to pay the money back. Things are very different in 2020 than things were in 1935, 1939. Lots of organizations have got mandatory procedures to bring criminal prosecution. They don't want to, waste of their time, but they've got to follow their internal procedures. What happens if they do? You've got to think this through. And this is the deal with step 9. You take the proposed amend and you start to think through what would happen if a friend of mine, so for example, in this country, I know a lot of people that have gone to local supermarkets like Tesco's and Sainsbury's and admitted to shoplifting from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, fine. Marks and Spencer's take a different attitude. A couple of people have started down the process. It was very clear that if they proceeded with the amend, it would have automatically triggered a prosecution. Now, this is going to take the company's time and money. It's going to take the police's time and money. It's going to take the court's time and money, depending on what the crime is. There could be expert witnesses. There are lawyers. There are legal clerks. There are solicitors' firms. There are barristers' chambers. There's the criminal justice system. There are the people administering the community service. And who's footing the bill for all of this? The taxpayer. And you're potentially incurring tens, and if it's serious, hundreds of thousands of pounds. So you can set a wrong right. Well, there, the Freudian slip reveals what's going on there. A friend of mine, I'll give you an example of how this can be dealt with. A friend of mine defrauded the housing benefit people for, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 30,000 pounds. I can't remember the amount. And he was willing to pay it back over a number of years. He established with the local authority in question, so he found out that if he were to admit to it, there'd be a criminal prosecution. He'd end up with a criminal record. He would be less employable, potentially dependent on the state for income, unable to support his wife and children. Lots of people involved. And so he did, and particularly the real question here, I think the family were neither here nor there on it. I think they would have supported him either way. But the question is, if this is going to incur lots of money, taxpayers' money, the advice, this is a friend of mine, the advice he was given was go to 10 people who are top rate taxpayers, who are paying at 40% tax, and say, right, I got £30,000 here that I'm willing to give to a housing charity to help house people in housing difficulties. Or I can go back to the housing benefits people, repay the 30,000 and incur the cost of a court case on top. Which do you think would be more beneficial to society? All 10 said, give it to the housing charity. Those are the people who are ultimately affected. They stand in the place of the taxpayers who are ultimately affected. And it was a brilliant move, because you are literally consulting people in the category who are affected by the amend. So with criminal, I know some people who've admitted to crimes and gone to prison, and they are very equivocal about whether it is the right thing. There is no one rule that fits everything, but these have got to be carefully thought through. And the question is, what is going to place me in the best position to be useful to others? What is going to square my accounts with the universe? The local branch of Tesco's question is a very interesting one as well, I think. If you do a proper step 8, you say, well, who has been harmed? If I've been thieving vodka bottles, I didn't thieve from supermarkets, I did thieve from other places, and all of that stuff. By the way, go around your flat or your house and identify any object that belongs or belonged to someone else and mail it back. I found dozens of the things, little things that sticky fingers had picked up over the years, mailed them all back. Anyway, Tesco's, that's a supermarket if you're American or not. Okay. Local supermarket, thousands of branches. Who suffered if you pilfer from the local Tesco's? It's not the staff of the Tesco's. It's covered by their shrinkage, it's called. They expect that from an accounting point of view. It's not the manager. It's not the security guard. It's the shareholders of Tesco's. The people you owe the amends to are not the people who work in the shop. It's the people who are harmed by your theft, and those are the owners of the business. And so what people I know have done with that particular situation is most of these big firms have corporate social responsibility programs where they give back money to the community, where they allow people to actively contribute to those schemes. So you find a way of volunteering or paying into those schemes, which directly benefits, apart from the fact it's benefiting the community, as opposed to incurring, clogging up the court system, which is already clogged up. you're going straight to the source, which is the organization itself and the owners of the organization. And my experience with this is with my own criminal behavior. There was one case where it would have ruined my father's reputation for it to have come out in the local town what happened. So I found alternative ways of making amends. A good example my friend Tom gives of a kid who stole lots of money from a gas station where he worked. And I think there the decision was not to reveal his identity. It would have been new information. It would have upset the bloke to think that his employee he trusted had been thieving. Other people have different stories. I know Bob D has a very different story about thieving from an employer, but there are different experiences, and that's fine. In this case, the kid every day just mailed $10 in the post in a otherwise empty envelope. He got the money back to him, and it was dealt with. There are lots of ways of doing this, and each situation has to be judged carefully in its specific context. What else? I've covered most of these. Interesting line, couple of lines. There is an example in the book of writing a letter to an ex-wife. It doesn't say you rush up to the ex-wife you owe alimony to. It says you write to her. Other examples of the application, the second half of step 9, it talks about if you've been wild with other women, well, that's its example. Dear, tell your wife. Well, if she knows what you've done, you can admit it, but don't go into details. Don't bring other people into it. This principle of don't reveal new information is all the way through that chapter. I just want to give some other specific examples. I had a very good friend when I was a kid in Germany. And we had a falling out when I was 18. And it centered, the last time I'd seen him was when we were both 18, 19, and I'd been very drunk. I'd said some really inappropriate things and we never saw each other again. Now, I did not know at the time why we didn't see each other again. You're 18, you're 19, lots of things just fizzle and people go in different directions. People end up in different countries, which we indeed did. But I had the most appalling guilt over what I thought I'd destroyed this relationship. And I couldn't find him, I lost track of him. When the internet comes along, I start trying to trace him. Nothing. Pretty unusual name, but still nothing. What I do is I keep my list of the unfindables. I think I looked at it today out of curiosity. I've got about eight people on the unfindables list now. But he was on the unfindables list. And I was in a meeting a couple of years ago, and when something flashes through your mind, do something with it, maybe. And his name started to flash through my mind again. I can't tell you how many hours. Once a year, I would spend an hour trying to find this person. I tried again. Doesn't matter that I'd failed, once a year for the last God knows however many years. I paid money to an American. There are these services in America where you pay them some money and they do some tracing. And it came up with some information where I discovered there was someone with a similar name, but with an extra barrel to the surname. And I found a website which made reference to that person, and there was a piece of biographical information which suggested it could be the same person. And then I took the first name and the new barrel of the surname, and I spent about $150, and I traced him, and I found him, and I made amends, and he had no recollection of the conversation. And I'm going to be seeing him in Vermont in about 3 weeks. He's invited me and my other half and my best friend in New York to come spend the day. I'm going to be in New Hampshire. We're going to spend the day with him. This was a huge cloud over my life for years, but again, I tried again and again and again. I keep those people not constantly in my mind, but close enough. There was another case with a teacher at school. I was incredibly effed up, and there was a teacher who was incredibly kind to me and helped me with my one particular A level I was struggling with, but also as my personal tutor. It was a boarding school, so your relation, they're in loco parentis. So she rather took me under her wing, but I lost touch with her. Similar thing, surname change, couldn't trace her. How do you trace someone with the surname Brown? I mean, really. But a situation arose on Facebook where I was in contact with someone that I knew from 35 years ago. And we talked about another teacher. And I contacted her through a chain of people. I finally found this person. We had this amazing dialogue by email, which extended over a few months. And I hadn't harmed her, but I owed her a huge debt of gratitude. And I owed her a follow-up to say it all worked out in the end. But she thought I was going to die. And she was so glad I found her. Mark Houston talks about if you went to the top of the Empire State Building and slit open a feather pillow and shook it and let the wind take each of those feathers wherever it wanted in the world. Step 9 is going and retrieving all of those feathers. Impossible. Well, this was someone else's story, actually. And the bloke's punchline was, it's impossible. You can't find all the feathers. Mark Houston's response was, what if you have a personal relationship with the creator of all those feathers? Very good answer. And I've found people I shouldn't have been able to find. And just with a couple of other things. When I was 11, I was living in France. My parents shipped me off to all sorts of families who they did not even know. I mean, the whole notion of stranger danger just didn't exist in my family. As oh, you're going to be living with the Ferreros this summer. Who are they? I don't know. They seem nice. Anyway, so complicated. I was living with the Ferreros in Paris, and I left a window open I shouldn't have left open, and a cat fell 4 stories. It was an accident. I was 11. I didn't mean to do this. The cat survived. I had to have an operation. The cat survived. Do I owe amends? Yes. Can I find the Ferreros? No. Can I find the cat is long gone. But a couple of things. I made a lump sum, eye-watering lump sum donation to a cat charity to pay for a serious cat operation. And I follow something on Facebook where there's this cat charity in Greece where whenever they've got these cats that need, that they look after these feral cats and they patch them up and neuter them and so on the Greek islands. And whenever one of these little cats needs an operation, I send them some money. I don't care that it's all more than the cost of what the original harm would have been. I don't care. I'm going to carry on doing that. That is the ongoing. It does not. Now, I'm clear with amends. I'm up to date. But as time progresses, my opportunity to round off those experiences continues. And one last point. For years, until I made that first donation, large donation to a cat charity to pay for an operation, cats did not like me. When I made that donation, cats started running towards me. That's cats. Imagine the effect of making amends to human beings. got problems with other people, problems with addictions, compulsions, intrusive thoughts, whatever it is, the obsessions of the mind, Chuck would call it, maybe you want to revisit steps 8 and 9. I bet there's something in there. That's all I got. Over to you, Patrick.
Thanks a million, Tim. That was really great. Just great stuff. So, as I said earlier, if you need a sponsor at all, we have a sponsorship WhatsApp group, and we have a list of available sponsors. If you're willing to sponsor and want to be on the list, you can send me a direct message for the male sponsorship coordinator